permission to record the chat,
Right on.
which he has. We can't record the chat unless the other party agrees. Okay, Joe, we have a sold-out crowd here. I think we'll probably end up with about 100 members here.
Great.
And so this is one of the largest groups I think we've ever had, except when you spoke last.
Okay. I'll take that as a compliment.
All right, so it's on. You're on.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm going to take George's word that he didn't just, sit in an empty room and not putting me on about the big crowd. I will ask for some audience participation at some point, so we'll try to get an idea of who's actually there. So I'm going to take control of your password.
Wait a second, Joe.
Yes.
Mute your mic.
Okay.
Good idea. Yes, we're getting a little feedback there. All right, we're going to take control of your passwords. Now, I want to begin today with a question. And that question is, first of all, let me make sure there we go. That question is, how do you feel about passwords? So what I want you to do is think about passwords. Think about you go to a website and it says, I need you to generate a new password for this thing that you're signing up for. How do you feel about that? Maybe it's 6 months later. You signed up for a service a long time ago. Now you're back at some website and it asks you, would you please enter the password that you came up with all those months ago? How do you feel about that? What happens when a site asks you to supply a security question and an answer? Like, what was your mother's maiden name? Or what street did you grow up on? How does that make you feel? Let's say some smart-ass security expert comes in and says, how secure are your passwords? How does that make you feel? Now, I would like you to just hold on to your feelings about passwords and look at 3 pictures and think to yourself, which one of these 3 pictures best fits my feelings about passwords? Is it this one? I'm pretty happy and relaxed about passwords. Is it this one? They're a cause for some thought and contemplation and maybe consternation. Or is it this one? Now, I think a lot of people are kind of in this spot, but what I have observed in talking to a lot of people about passwords is that there are sort of 2 continua, if you will. So imagine a chart. I'm going to make a little chart here, and on the vertical axis we have anxiety. So the higher you are on this chart, the more anxiety you have about passwords. And then there's another axis. That's knowledge, and this is the farther you are toward the left, the less you know about password security, and the farther you are toward the right, the more you know about password security. Now, what I have observed is that a lot of people are kind of right here. They are blissfully ignorant. They don't have a lot of anxiety about passwords because they don't know that there's anything to be anxious about. Maybe they don't have very many passwords. Maybe they haven't heard any scary stories about password break-ins or that sort of thing, and it's just not a big deal to them. So they're happy, but only because they don't know enough not to be. And then people start listening to the news and they start getting more passwords, and as the requirements start building up, you must have this number of characters and it can't be a word from a dictionary and all these different things, the anxiety starts to increase. It's like, well, that is kind of more difficult than I thought it would be. And then people hear more things. A week and a half ago, Evernote had a security breach, and everyone all of the users of Evernote across the world had to reset their passwords. Before that, there was a Twitter break-in, a LinkedIn break-in, all these other ones, and a lot of stories in the news about password thefts and break-ins, and all of the consequences that can occur if this happens. And once you start thinking about those things, you might get to the sort of, high anxiety point. Now, the good news is, and what I'm here to tell you about, is that as you learn more about password security, you can go back down on this little bell curve to a state of blissful enchantment. And that's what I want to do today, is I want to move you sort of rightward on this graph. Now, there's just one problem, and that is that if you are currently on that left-hand side of the graph, if you are the blissfully ignorant smiley face, or maybe just the thinker, I might have to move you past into more anxiety to get past it. So you might have to get a little bit scared before you get to the state of peace and enlightenment, but we'll move you there as quickly as we can. Now, statistically speaking, and I don't want this to sound like a judgment, but statistically speaking, the approach that most of you have toward passwords is probably wrong. Now, again, I don't mean this as a moral judgment. I'm not saying you're doing something illegal. I'm not saying you're doing something unethical. I'm saying that if you are like a very large percentage of the internet users in the world, what you're doing is dangerous. And when I say dangerous, that's actually a euphemism for infelicitous, let's say. There are too many dangers out there to be oblivious toward password security, and solving password security problems is too easy. So let's not be in this category. I'm going to try to entice you to that right side of that graph. So in a book, which I will tell you about in a little bit, I talk about a lot of threats to your passwords. I talk about a lot of risks and a lot of behaviors that can lead to password problems. This morning, I'm going to talk about 3 big mistakes that are perhaps the most common mistakes when it comes to passwords. So I'm going to list them off now, and then I'm going to go through each one and talk about them in detail. Mistake number 1 is choosing guessable passwords. I'm going to tell you in more detail what I mean by guessable in just a moment. Mistake number 2 is reusing passwords. You pick a password for one site, and then you go on to another site and you use the same password, and you keep using the same password over and over again. And the third big mistake is assuming that security requires inconvenience. There are a lot of people who say, yes, I know I should choose better passwords, but it's so hard to remember them, or I can never come up with a good password, and it's just too inconvenient, so I'm going to trade off security and convenience. So we're going to talk about that as well. So first, guessability. Now, you have probably seen when you go to create a new password, most sites have certain restrictions. They say, well, it must contain at least a certain number of characters, must not contain a word from a dictionary, must contain at least 1 capital letter, 1 lowercase letter, 1 number, those sorts of things. Why do they have these restrictions? Well, the restrictions are there because either people, or more often computers, are very, very good at guessing passwords that are simpler or that follow any sort of pattern. So let me give you a few examples of easily guessed passwords, and I'm sorry to say all of these examples are used by thousands and thousands of people out there. So one example is a common word, a word from a dictionary or something that's easy to remember and type, like baseball or computer, or the word password. Very bad password. It's easily guessed, and the reason it's easily guessed is that hackers know people use these sorts of words a lot. So if they're trying to break into someone's account, these will be the first words they try. Another category, adding numbers. Well, the system says I had to include 1 digit, so I'll just put the number 1 on the end of my otherwise bad password. But hackers know this too, and of course that will be the second thing they check for. A lot of people say, I'll outsmart the hackers. I will substitute some of the letters for numbers. I'll replace the letter O with a 0, and I'll replace the T with a 7 and the E with a 3 and so forth. Or, in this particular type of substitution is called leet, but there are lots of other substitutions where you take one character and swap it for something else that looks similar, or other sort of easy substitutions that you can make quickly on the keyboard. But again, hackers know all of these tricks and they can test for them very, very easily. Then there are keyboard patterns like just, go across the top row or some other row, or get really fancy and do diagonals or do corners or do every other character. Don't do that, because again, if you came up with it, it's a safe bet that a hacker also came up with it, and they've added that to their hacking algorithms, so these sorts of things will be checked automatically. You might think that a couple of Latin words or a quote from a movie or something of that sort would be harder to guess, but in fact, it's very, very easy to guess because a lot of people do that. And you might think that the name of your daughter and your dog or something similar that no one outside of your friends or family would necessarily know would be hard to guess, but again, not true, unfortunately. Now, a lot of people say, you keep telling me that these passwords like Susie Fido are easily guessable, but really, how would some hacker who doesn't know me ever guess that? Well, it's like this. The world's hackers, and there are a lot of them, there happen to be a lot in Russia and a lot in China, but elsewhere too. They have some really good hardware and some really, really good software. And what this hardware and software can do basically is try every possible password really, really fast. Some of them can check billions of passwords every single second. So remember, you're not just up against people. If some guy breaks into your house and steals your computer, and all he really is after is the hardware itself, he probably doesn't have the expertise to crack your password, and he probably doesn't care. He's just going to wipe your machine and sell it. But if you happen to have the misfortune of randomly being selected to have one of your accounts hacked by someone in Russia with thousands or tens or hundreds of thousands of computers working together in a massive botnet, maybe they were all infected with some sort of virus or malware, and so they're now all working together to check billions of passwords a second, then you will not have any luck with a guessable password, because basically computers can guess much more rapidly than humans can. And unfortunately, the situation has gotten a lot worse in recent years. Now, I wrote a different book about passwords back in 2006. And in that book, I gave what turned out to be embarrassingly bad advice. In that book, I said, as long as you have a password that is at least 9 characters long, and as long as those characters include an uppercase letter, a lowercase letter, a digit, and a punctuation mark, it would take a supercomputer centuries to be able to crack this password. So, none of us is going to live for centuries, so it's safe enough for all practical purposes. So that was in 2006. Would you like to know how long it takes an off-the-shelf PC in 2013 to crack a 9-character password with all those different character sets? 5.5 hours. So if you thought that a 6 or 8 or 9 character password was safe, I'm sorry to say, not anymore. It is very, very, very easy to crack them. Now, how do you resist password cracking? Well, the first thing I want to point out, and this is something that I get into a great deal of detail in my book. A lot of people have this idea that, okay, well, I sit down at my computer. Let's say we're talking about, your Mac's login password. I sit down at my computer and I have to physically type my password, and if I get it wrong, it'll ask me again, but there is kind of a couple seconds of delay in there. And in some cases, with some systems, the more times you guess wrong, the longer the delay is. And it's easy to think, well, how is somebody going to check a billion passwords or billions of passwords a minute? Don't they have to be actually sitting at my computer? And aren't they subject to these delays of a few seconds between each one? And I'm sorry to say that that's an illusory form of security. So there are situations, it's very good that systems like this put barriers in the way of attackers. But if someone gets access to the raw encrypted file that holds your password, then they don't have to go through all of these extra steps. They can just hammer away at it offline, as it were. And this is exactly what Evernote was afraid of a week and a half ago. They had an encrypted file stolen, and the passwords in that file were fairly secure, but they were afraid that a hacker was going to run this massive encrypted file through these very, very sophisticated algorithms that in a matter of hours or days or weeks would reveal all the passwords inside them. So what is your defense against this sort of thing? Well, the word is entropy. And of course, entropy means disorder or chaos. But when it comes to passwords, entropy is your friend. When it comes to passwords, the word entropy really means unguessability. So, how do you get entropy? How do you increase the amount of entropy, which in turn decreases guessability because it makes it that much harder for one of these sophisticated computers or botnets to guess your password? Well, there are three ways. One way is to increase the character set. So I've talked already about the fact that you don't want to just use lowercase letters. If you add uppercase letters, if you add numbers, if you add symbols, what this does is it increases the size of the search space. So if I know that I only have to check 26 characters per slot, that will go much, much faster because it's a limited search set. If I have to now add the numbers and I'm checking 36 possibilities per slot, that makes it much harder. If I add punctuation and I have to check 46 or 56 possibilities per slot, that makes it much, much harder. So the number of different kinds of characters you choose in your password makes a big difference because basically this slows down the automated attacks. It makes them take, on average, much longer. The second thing you can do to increase entropy is simply to make your password a lot longer. Now, you may have seen a great comic on the web on XKCD about password security. And basically, it's making the point that a password consisting of 4 ordinary English words like correct horse battery staple is actually pretty darn secure, and it's more secure than a much shorter password that includes, numerical and character substitutions. Now, you shouldn't, of course, use this particular password, but they're making a good point, which is that there's more than one way to get entropy. If you say, well, substituting characters is really hard to remember and it's really hard to type, there is another way to get entropy, which is just to make your password really, really long. And making it really long can substitute in some senses for not having a variety of character sets. A third way is randomness. So all of these algorithms that try to check your passwords look for any sort of pattern. So that a pattern could be not just a word in a dictionary or a name or a date. I mean, these are very common things, of course, but also pronounceable portions. For example, the word the password Ninja Boy, that's actually a bunch of standard English syllables. But if you just took like inj, that's not a word, but it's pronounceable. So that follows the rules of English pronunciation in a way that nja does not. So nja would not be a pronounceable string in English, whereas inj would be. So if your password includes a lot of pronounceable strings, even if they don't add up to an actual word, that still gives attackers a leg up. That makes it that much easier for them to check because they're going to check anything that looks like a pattern first. And of course, remember, computers are much better at detecting patterns than we are. So you can have multiple character sets. You can have length. You can have randomness. But the more of these things you have, the higher entropy your password will have. If you feel like what you really need is just a simple to type password, make it long. If you want a nice short password, make it random and make sure that it has lots of different character sets in it. The second big mistake a lot of people make is reusing passwords. I know a lot of people do this. I used to do it myself. I know family members who do this. And I really understand why it happens. So you're constantly bombarded with requests to create a password for something or other, and it's hard to come up with a new password. It's hard to remember a password, and so it's totally understandable that there would be this temptation to reuse passwords. Well, I had a good password for my bank, so I'll just continue using that for PayPal. I'll use the same one for Amazon because, it's a good password. And the thinking is, as long as my password is really long and random and strong, why not? Why not reuse it everywhere? So I have to tell you why not. Have you ever heard of these companies? These are among the many organizations in the world that in recent months have had lists of passwords either hacked or leaked or stolen. I mentioned Evernote earlier, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook. Something happens. Maybe it's a disgruntled employee. Maybe it's a laptop that gets stolen. Maybe it's a programming error that leads to some vulnerability and a person can break in from the outside and get a hold of a list of passwords. Anyway, something happens. And if you do a quick search in Google, you can actually find, hey, that big LinkedIn security breach, what were all the passwords? And you can actually get a list of all the passwords that were stolen, many, many, many thousands of them. And you can get this list sorted in order of frequency. So you can see, oh yes, well, 10,000 people used password 1 as their password, and 5,000 people used, Cordy02 or whatever it is. So you look at these lists and you realize, first of all, wow, a lot of people are using the same really, really bad passwords. But the other thing you have to recognize is this. When an attacker gets a hold of one of these lists of passwords, they're going to do three things. First of all, if the list is encrypted, they're going to decrypt it. And that might take them a while, but eventually they will probably get that plain text representation of all the passwords. And so let's say someone has stolen the list of LinkedIn passwords. Well, of course they're going to try to break into the LinkedIn account. They have your LinkedIn password now. But who cares? I mean, who cares if somebody goes to LinkedIn and changes, your profile picture or the city where you live or something? That's minor and that can always be undone. That's not why people steal passwords like this. The reason they steal password lists like this is so that they can get to number 3. Like, oh, well, John Smith has the password baseball1 for LinkedIn. I wonder if John Smith uses the password baseball1 for his bank, for PayPal, for Amazon, for Gmail, for Facebook, for iCloud, and they will go and try that same password on as many different sites as they can. And that is the problem. That can do you an awful lot of damage. And I'm not just talking about inconvenience. Of course, it's inconvenient to have to change your password, to have to, replace information that's been vandalized or deleted. But they can delete online backups. If you use iCloud and Back to My Mac, they can wipe off your Mac. Everything, this has happened. And if they have access to your contact database, they can spam everyone in your contact list. If they have access to your bank, they can buy stuff and transfer money to themselves. I mean, people can do some really bad damage. Now, in most cases, your bank is subject to laws that probably limit you to damage from fraud. And there are ways of recovering from identity theft, but it's going to ruin your day. It might ruin several days. And you could lose some things like, photographs or important personal data that you might never be able to get back. So it's a really, really, really bad idea to reuse a password ever. Moral of the story, just don't. Just never use the same password in more than one place. You can't prevent any possible security breach at LinkedIn or Twitter or Dropbox or one of these big companies. they're going to happen. But what you can do is you can limit the damage so that if you are unlucky enough to have that one password stolen, then at least only that one password and not all the rest of them are affected. All right, so I've talked about two big mistakes. The first one was choosing lousy passwords, because choosing lousy passwords that are guessable will make you personally vulnerable to an attack on any particular account. Reusing passwords makes you vulnerable in case one of those passwords is stolen. The third major mistake is feeling like there's this impossible trade-off between security and convenience. So, here's the problem. On the one hand, you might have a really great password like this one here. And this was just something that I randomly generated. And it's long, and it has all the different character sets, and it's random, so it's pretty strong. It will resist a brute force attack for a very, very, very long time. But it's hard to create, hard to remember, and hard to type. And I want to mention here, a lot of people have a slightly mistaken idea about randomness. And the idea is that a person can create a random password just as easily as a computer can. And a lot of very complicated studies have been done to show that when people try to create random passwords, they actually follow patterns. It's almost impossible for a human being to create a truly random password just because of the way our brains are wired. You are almost bound to include some patterns in your passwords. Computers have an easier job, let's say, at randomness. It's still not a certain thing. There are some computer programs that purport to create random passwords that they're not entirely random, but let's just say they're more random. And the more random a password is, the better. So don't rely on your brain to create a random password. You might be unpleasantly surprised that it's not as random as you think. On the other hand, let's take a nice, easy password like my name is Joe. Hey, it even has uppercase and lowercase letters. And that's fairly long. But if you use any of the many password checkers out there that will actually measure the amount of entropy in a password, you'll find this has lousy entropy. It is not a very good password at all. It will not resist attacks. But what are my other choices? Well, I'll tell you. Here is my basic strategy. Now, I have over 600 different passwords. I have passwords for, all kinds of websites and apps and services. And I encrypt my hard drive using File Vault, so I have password for that. I have login passwords. I have all kinds of stuff. And I sat down and thought really, really hard about the ways I use passwords, what works for me and what doesn't. And I sort of boiled it down into three elements. And as I'll mention in a moment, one of these elements is a little bit oversimplified, but we'll get to that. So the first thing is, figure out which few passwords, emphasis on few, you have to memorize, emphasis on have to. So here's where we start. There will be some passwords that you cannot get away with not having in your head. For example, let's say you have a Mac and you have everything on it is safely encrypted. You use File Vault and you have to log in. Well, even if you use some sort of password manager so that you can store all of your passwords on your Mac, you have to have the password that gets you into the Mac in the first place. And again, password managers, which I'll talk about in a minute, things like 1Password and LastPass, these are great, and I definitely recommend them, but they all use one master password to unlock the rest of your passwords. So if you don't know that password, you're kind of out of luck. So I thought about the passwords that unlock other passwords, and I thought about which passwords do I end up typing so many times every day that it would just be ridiculous for me not to know them. So for me, I find that many times every day I'm typing my Mac's login password. You know, my administrator password. I'm installing software or I'm doing whatever. I always have to know my own user account's password on my Mac. I also find that I'm very, very often typing my iCloud password. So, you know, I want to download something from the App Store or use iTunes or whatever. iTunes and the App Store on all the different platforms are constantly prompting me for my iCloud password. So I had to memorize that one. And of course, my master password for my password manager. For me, well, we'll get to that. For me, it's a very, very short list of words you have to memorize. So you have your short list, and you make those few passwords really, really strong, and you memorize them. And I'll talk about more about that in just a moment. And then step 3 is use a password manager for everything else. Now, password managers are great tools, and they will help you in a lot of different situations. But you'll notice a little asterisk after the word everything there, because there are places where a password manager can't really help you. There are places where even if you have asked a program like 1Password to create a wonderful long random password for you and remember it for you, where you can't just enter it with one click, where you have to either laboriously, retype it or copy it and paste it somewhere. And although I can't get into a lot of detail about those situations this morning, I do talk in my book about what to do about them. But for the 98% case, for most cases, these 3 steps will do it for you. Now, I start with what I call the VIP list, or very important passwords. So mine has 5 items. So for me, my 5 items are my Mac's login password, my iCloud password, and my password manager's master password. I've mentioned those 3 before. The 4th one is my Gmail password, because I end up using that a lot. And the 5th one is my Dropbox password, because I store tons of stuff in my Dropbox, and I need to be able to get at my Dropbox even when I'm not around my computer. So for me, those are literally the only 5 passwords that I have to memorize. If you could put a gun to my head, I would have not the faintest idea what any of my other passwords are. I truly don't know. In some cases, I've never even looked at them. I only have to worry about those 5, and those 5 in turn can unlock literally everything else for me. Remember, these are the passwords that you will put on your VIP list are passwords that you need frequently, and passwords that you might have to use without a password manager, such as the password to unlock your password manager. So again, the examples I gave there, and perhaps a few others. Now, my list has 5 items on it. Your list might have 2 items. It might have 3. I would say that if your VIP list has more than 10 or 12 items, you're doing it wrong. There is probably some better way to store and enter passwords if you have to do this for more than a handful. And so basically my premise is, you're talking 5 passwords here. Even if those 5 passwords are really long and really random, it's not that big of a deal to memorize them. So you want to choose high entropy passwords. And remember, you can do this in multiple ways. If you want to use a long string of English words, that's great. Now, slight caution here. If you want to use a phrase like correct horse battery staple, again, not that particular phrase, many websites and services won't let you because they require you to have an uppercase letter, they require you to have a digit, and they often don't allow you to have spaces. So even though that password has fairly high entropy, it won't actually work for Apple, because Apple is going to force you to have all these other elements. Now, you can, if you're making your password really, really long anyway, you can simplify some of those other elements. You can just, have like, capital letter A, lowercase letter A, number 1, and then the rest of it or something. But you also have to contend with the fact that not every service will let you store an indefinitely long password. I think Apple Well, there's actually this curiosity with Apple, which if you go to appleid.apple.com, you can enter a 34-character password, but then when you go to the iCloud site to log in, that will only accept 32 characters. So go figure. Anyway, 32 characters is fairly common, but I got an email from a guy a couple days ago whose bank, of all things, restricted him to no more than 6 characters, and all 6 of those characters had to be digits. That's the craziest thing I've ever heard of. It's insane. But my point is, you can freely choose what kind of password you want to use, but you also have to work within the rules of whichever system you're putting that password into. Some of them have more sane, generous rules, and some of them have more restrictive rules that end up working against security, ironically. So you have your list of VIPs and you write them down. Write them down on a piece of paper and memorize them. Now, I'm not a big fan of all these mnemonic tricks. If you know some, then more power to you. But there are people who say, well, you take a long sentence, like it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, and you take the first letter from each word and you memorize that. And this is actually an example of something where it looks random. It doesn't look like there's a pattern, but there is a pattern. Computers can figure that sort of thing out. But okay, let's just take that as an example. You can get sort of modest entropy that way. But for me, I have had to memorize my social security number. I've had to memorize who knows how many phone numbers and addresses and other kinds of random-ish strings, and basically you can do it. It might be challenging. You might have to actually write down your password 100 times in a row on a chalkboard. You can erase it. You might have to break your password down into chunks of 3 or 4 characters and memorize each of those, and then move on to the next. But again, you're talking about a few passwords, 3, 4, 5 passwords, and even if they're really long and complex, really, you can do it. It won't be a problem. Because remember, these are going to be the only passwords you have to memorize. Then for everything else, you use a password manager. Now, a password manager is a program that will run on your Mac, PC, iPhone, iPad, whatever. It has a few important capabilities. First important capability is a random password generator. So you can say, hey, give me a 14-character password that includes at least 2 digits and at least 2 punctuation symbols, go. Or whatever the rules are that you want to use. And it'll say, yeah, here's a random password. Don't like that one? Yeah, here's another one. And you say, great, save that. Done. So when you go to a new site and it says, I need you to give me a password, you don't have to agonize over it. You don't have to say, well, okay, what was that pattern that I used to use? Or if I take the site's name and I append today's date and I do, don't worry about that. Just say, click a button, your password generator will come up with a new random password for you, enter it, done. Now, of course, once it has created these random passwords for you, it's got to save them, and it's going to save them in an encrypted database so that if anybody did happen to get a hold of your computer or get a hold of your password database, they wouldn't just be able to see your passwords, they would need your master password to get into them. That, of course, remember, has to be a very, very strong one. So automatic random password generation is one important feature of a password manager. Another one is autofill for web forms. So when you go to your favorite website, one of several things might happen. Either you have to, in some cases, you can set up a password manager such that as soon as I go to facebook.com, I do literally nothing except, click that URL or go to that bookmark, and it instantly fills in my username, password, logs me in. I don't even do anything at all. Some password managers will automatically fill in your stuff for you, but make you click them to log in. And some don't fill in a form automatically. They'll say, okay, now that you're here, press a keystroke to fill in the form, keeping in mind the fact that you might have 2 or 3 or 4 different sets of credentials for a given site. So there are all kinds of different approaches, but autofill for web forms, in whichever form it takes, basically saves you having to either retype or copy and paste your passwords. Now I want to pause here and say, you may be thinking, well, doesn't Keychain do that? I mean, Safari uses Keychain, and Keychain is built into OS 10. So, if Safari asks me to memorize a password, it's stored in my Keychain, and most other browsers, for that matter, have their own built-in keychains of sorts. So why can't I just use that? And here's the thing about Keychain. Keychain does store passwords and does autofill them, and it even has, if you know where to look, its own random password generator. The problem with Keychain is twofold. Number one, it's awkward to use. If you want to go into Keychain and find out what your password was for some site that you stored a long time ago, it's a very cumbersome activity. The second problem with Keychain is that it only works on your Mac. If you have an iPhone, iPad, Android phone, a PC, then your Keychain doesn't sync to those places. You can't use your Keychain anyplace else besides your Mac. Now, if you only ever use passwords on a Mac, then that's not a problem. But for me, I have tons of devices. Right here, there's, I'm looking at a Mac. There's an iPad right here, another iPad here, an iPhone right there, and another Mac over here. And I need for my passwords to be available on all of my devices. So what you really want is a tool that exists on all the different platforms that you personally use, that you personally care about, and that can securely sync your passwords among all of them. Now, I will say that on iOS, we have this little problem. You may have heard of this thing called sandboxing, which basically means that apps for the most part can't talk to each other. There are some exceptions, but basically a password manager on an iOS device can't reach into Safari and say, oh, here's a password for you. That would be against the rules. So there are some clever ways around this. Some password managers have their own built-in browser, so you just, instead of using Safari, you use the password manager's own browser to browse the web, and it'll enter passwords for you. 1Password has a really cool trick. If you're in Safari and you go to some site that asks you for a password, you can go up to the URL and just enter the letters OP at the beginning, like right before HTTP. Just make it OP HTTP. Hit enter, and it will then take that very same page and direct you right back into 1Password where it can autofill it for you. Or you can use a bookmarklet in Safari to do that for you. So there are ways around this that it doesn't have to be cumbersome at all. Now, as I said, I like 1Password. I've used 1Password for years and years and years. I think it's an excellent password manager. It has all the features that I want or care about. There are many others. LastPass is another really good choice. It has excellent security. It's entirely web-based, so you get browser plugins for your favorite browser. They do have a LastPass app for your iPhone or iPad. But basically, everything is stored encrypted in the cloud, and there's no actual desktop app to worry about. It has a lot of good features. The interface is not as beautiful as 1Password's, but then again, it can be configured in a way that makes it even easier to use. So that's great. There's also RoboForm. And in my book, I talk about a lot of others. But my point is, I don't really care which one you use. You pick whichever one you like, whichever one makes you happy, but use something. Because password managers will make your life way, way easier as well as much more secure. So if you can see some more suggestions in the book or do a web search for Password Manager or Password Vault or Keychain, that sort of thing. Now, I spent a lot of time working on this book that's shown here to try to get to the bottom of the whole password problem. I've written a lot of books and I've written a lot of articles. This is one that I am particularly proud of. We put a ton of work into this. And it's really just one of my favorite books ever. I lay out much more of the story than I covered today. I talk about many of the additional threats to passwords, many of the additional risks, and I go into really quite a lot of detail about entropy and about how password cracking works so you know what it is you're guarding against and why entropy helps with that. I talk about all the different features you might want to look for in a password manager and go into more detail about how to create and remember those passwords on your VIP list. And there's also a comic in there. This is just a little portion of it. And I also have, I have two appendixes. And Appendix A talks about two-factor security. So this is something, Google offers this optionally. Dropbox offers this optionally. Your bank may offer this. So this is where you have not just a password, but you have something else. So the something else might be a little token, a little secure device that generates a different number every 30 seconds. Or that something else might be a code that is sent to your cell phone by SMS. Or it might be, a fingerprint swipe or something else. But anyway, two factors, not just your password, but your password plus something else. So I talk about what that's all about in one appendix and, how, when, and why to use that and how it increases your security. And then in the second appendix, which turned out to be very, very popular, I talk about dealing with your uncle. We're just going to say I have a friend who, despite, yes, Joe, I get what you're saying. There's a lot of danger out there. The internet is an unsafe neighborhood, and I really should do this, but I'm just not gonna. It's still I can't get my head around password managers, or I'm not willing to choose different passwords, or I'm just I have a system I like, or whatever it is. This is the appendix for people that have some sort of a complaint, that just are unwilling to follow my incredibly great advice for one reason or another. Now, whether that person is your uncle or your friend or you, I talk about sort of, what sorts of compromises you could make, understanding, of course, that you are decreasing your security, that you are increasing your risk, but I approach it from the something is better than nothing standpoint. So, if you don't follow all the rules, if you don't follow any of the rules, then you're in really bad shape. If you follow some of the rules, then you're in better shape than if you don't follow any. So I talk about various ways that you can sort of negotiate with a person who really wants to have better password security, but really isn't willing to think about it in the way that you might like. So the book is at this URL. It's $10. I like it an awful lot, and we've received some excellent feedback about it. And we have this little competition going. So you get the book, you read it, and you send us your story. Tell us, of course, we would like you to say, I love the book, it changed my life. But what we really want to know is, what is your personal story? Did you have a problem with passwords before? Did this book help you? Did it help your uncle? Did you learn anything really interesting from it? And if you allow us to post your story, or maybe a photograph of you with your uncle, or you and your password manager, we don't care. But if you allow us to put this on our website, then once a month for the next few months, I will pick my favorite story, and I will send that person a batch of my own homemade chocolate chip cookies. And they're really, really good cookies. So, do it for your password security, do it for the sake of your friends and family and your data, or do it for the cookies. And one way or another, take control of your passwords. So I've only covered just a small amount of what's in the book, and I'm sure that you must have some questions. So at this point, I would like to ask you to turn back on the microphone and lay them on me.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Okay, let's start right here.
Joe, last week I talked about my Apple ID being probably one of the most important logins that I have, and I went on the Apple site to change my ID to be more inclusive of non-alphanumeric characters, and it seems like the requirements for an Apple ID are very, very wimpy. Am I misunderstanding something?
Well, Okay, so an Apple ID will definitely let you have uppercase and lowercase letters, numbers, and some punctuation. Every site has their own. It's actually where when you get past what you can view on your keyboard that things get wonky. So with very few exceptions, anything that you can see, so like I'm looking at my row of number keys here. I have an exclamation point, an @ sign, and a pound sign, and so forth. In most cases, all of those visible characters are fine. There might be a few exceptions. Unfortunately, every site has a different set of exceptions, so you can't just say, well, exclamation point is always safe or underscore is always safe. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. But once you get out of that range into like things that you make with the Option key held down. So, foreign language characters, other Unicode characters, the more obscure punctuation. These things are often, very, very often disallowed even by Apple. And if you think about it, it's annoying, but there is some logic to it. For example, what if you type some random Option key character, some obscure punctuation mark or symbol or foreign letter, and then next week you have to enter your Apple ID on your Apple TV or on a PC where you're logging into your iCloud account or someplace else, and you're like, wait a minute, how do I get that character? Well, on my Mac it was just Option whatever, but how do I do it here? And I think a lot of the reason Apple in particular makes the decisions they do is they want to make sure that when you go to a different device that has a different keyboard or different restrictions, that you're not going to get into trouble entering your password. Now, I don't know off the top of my head exactly which characters Apple permits and doesn't. I know that my Apple ID includes punctuation. But it's unfortunate in a way, but there is a method to the madness. The only thing that just constantly bums me out is that every site seems to have their own idea of which punctuation characters are and are not allowed. I wish they'd all get their acts together and allow the same set.
Next question.
Do these password managers, can you turn them on and off? Because if you're away from your computer for a period of time, other people would have access to it.
Absolutely. Right. So you want to, these are things that you can lock and unlock, like your keychain or like the lock of your door. The idea is when you step away from your computer, you can either manually lock your keychain, or in almost universally, if not universally, they have an auto lock feature. They'll say, after X minutes of not being in use, lock myself, or whenever my Mac goes to sleep, lock myself. So 1Password has all of those features. If I haven't used it in a while, or if my Mac has gone to sleep, or if I've turned it off, it automatically locks itself. And yes, so that's absolutely crucial. You have to make sure that whether automatically or manually, your password manager is locked when you're not using your computer.
Next question. Please speak up as loud as you can.
Many financial institutions will lock you out after 3 or 4 tries.
Yep.
Does that mean we have to use less of a password, or do you still need a very long one?
Okay, so the reason they do this is what I was saying earlier, is they're trying to thwart a certain type of attack. So what they're trying to prevent is someone just sits down at a computer and says, what's Bob's password? I'll bet it's this. No, that's not it. Well, I'm going to try this. No, that's not it. And they try 3 times or 5 times or whatever it is, and the bank says, I'm not really sure that's Bob. I think Bob would have known his own password. So this sort of security is, it lulls people into thinking, well, I can just choose a pretty simple password because nobody is going to get it in only 3 tries. It might take 1,000 tries or 1,000,000 tries to guess my password. But the problem is not that. I mean, that is not the risk. That is not the reason you use a long password. The reason you use a long password is what I was describing earlier, where the bank's database of passwords gets stolen or leaked or hacked. So somebody at there's an inside job at the bank, and some IT guy gets his hands on the file, and that file gets out. And now the person who has that file, they still have to guess all the passwords, mind you, or they have to guess the one password that unlocks that file. But they can guess very, very rapidly because they don't have to go through the web interface to guess it. They don't have that barrier in front of them. They can just say, well, here's the raw data. I'm just going to keep trying until it goes bing, there it is. So the reason that those delays aren't an excuse to use simpler passwords is that you want to protect them against a brute force offline attack. You want to prevent them from being broken into by someone who has access to the raw encrypted data, and it is encrypted, or at least it should be. It usually is, and with a bank it certainly would be. But they're trying to break that encryption by guessing the password and doing it very, very rapidly. So I strongly recommend always using the strongest password that you can, because remember, and this is a point I try to emphasize in my book. If you're using a tool, a computer program to create a password for you and store it and enter it, it's no harder for your computer to make a 20-character random password than it is to make a 6-character password. It doesn't take any more effort to enter it, so why not? Why not make yourself extra secure just in case?
Go ahead.
Thanks. So Joe, you were talking about the ability of hackers to see our patterns. Are there patterns that you can observe that hackers use that would indicate to us that we are under attack?
Well, yes and no. So the thing is that attacks can come from a lot of different places. A very, very common way that people's passwords are attacked is, random probing over the internet. So there are all these botnets that just, they try every port on every IP address, and they say, can I get in here? Can I get in here? Can I get in here? Another way is malware. So you download a Trojan horse or a virus or some sort of malware, and then that can gets into your system and can send out stuff from the inside. And then there are, of course, somebody is attacking PayPal. How would you know? Now there are tools that will tell you, what's going on my network. So you can say, well, hey, look, this particular IP address keeps trying all the different ports on my computer. I'll bet that's an automated attack. Or tools that will search your Mac for malware that might be sending out passwords from the inside. But these are sort of geeky things to do. It's not like you can just install a piece of software that'll put up a little red light that says you might be under attack. And if the attack is not taking place in real time with software running on your Mac or trying to access things from the network, then you would simply have no way of knowing. So in the vast majority of cases, you won't know that you're under attack at the time that you are. Now, I run a server, and from time to time, I look through the server logs, and I see these things all the time. I see, it's just systematic, like, this IP address, this port, they try this. Next port, they try this. Next port, they try this. And then, it cycles through all, thousands of different ports from a certain IP address. And then a little while later, another IP address will try the same thing. These sorts of botnets that are doing these sorts of attacks are all over the place. It's very, very common. This is why your Mac has a firewall. This is why your router or your airport base station or whatever has a NAT server, so that it sort of blocks a lot of this traffic and it redirects it. So most Mac users aren't under direct threat from the outside. There is the occasional Trojan horse, the occasional malware. Most Mac users are really, I mean, the bigger threats, I think, are someone stealing a password from a site, or, if you have a laptop and you are in a public place, and you connect to an open Wi-Fi network, so you don't use WPA or you don't use VPN or some sort of encryption on your network, it's very, very easy to watch the traffic that's flowing across the network and for someone to just snatch a password right out of the air. I mean, literally right out of the air. And I know this because I've tried it. A few Google searches and a few downloads later, and you can have the tools that will let you watch unencrypted Wi-Fi traffic and pick out people's usernames and passwords. It's scary. So, again, this is something I talk about in the book. Make sure that you don't use open Wi-Fi networks, or that if you do, that you take extra steps to encrypt your traffic. The real problem, I think, is that, not that you're going to know that an attack is happening in real time, but simply that you don't know. It's because it is so hard to tell what all the dangers are. The best defense is just, you use a good lock and you keep it locked when it's not in use.
Next question.
So does this mean we shouldn't check our Mac mail when we're at Starbucks or something like that on our iPhone?
No, it doesn't mean that, actually. So when you are using Apple's services, we'll just stick with Apple for the moment. So if you're using iCloud, Apple encrypts all the data that is being transmitted to and from their servers. So whether you're using Mail on your iPhone, or whether you're using a web browser on a public computer, or whatever it may be, behind the scenes, Apple is using SSL. So if you happen to be using a web browser, you can actually see the address is HTTPS, S for secure. And you'll have the little lock icon there in the address bar. So when you are connecting to Apple's site, whether you're doing it through a web browser or an email client, Apple encrypts all the data coming to and from the server for exactly this reason. Most mail servers do this, at least optionally. Now, I know Google used to make it optional, and I think it might be on for everyone by default now. But you should check. You should make sure that whatever email system you're connecting to uses encryption, so that even if you're on a cellular connection or an open Wi-Fi network or whatever, that at least your email traffic is being encrypted. Now, if you are nervous, if you think, well, I'm just, I'm not sure about my particular email host or whatever, and there might be times when the only network that is available is an open, unencrypted Wi-Fi network, and you don't necessarily know how about the security on the other end. You can use what's called a virtual private network, or VPN. So basically, you can get an account with a company for a small number of dollars a month. They'll give you a username and a password, and you enter some stuff on your iPhone. And when you need to encrypt your connection, you turn this on. And it doesn't matter whether you're on a cellular connection or a Wi-Fi or whatever. What this does is it completely encrypts all the data coming to and from your iPhone or your iPad or whatever between you and this service, so that even if you're on an open network, even if you're using a site that doesn't involve any sort of encryption, that it's all bundled in this big big encrypted container that no one can break into. So I use a service called Ytopia. There's Hotspot Shield. There's Cloak. There's a whole bunch of other services like this. They're very reasonably priced, and good thing to have when you're not certain.
Why did you leave Paris?
George, before
The encryption was just too speedy. Or, what I tell people is I couldn't find a good burrito in Paris, which is actually true. Paris doesn't do Mexican food very well, and spicy food not at all. No, I mean, I was in Paris for 5.5 years. I had a really good time there. Also, I had challenges. It was good and bad. But after 5 years, my wife and I kind of decided we did what we came here to do. We had our experience, we had our adventure, and the ratio of enjoyment we're getting out of this to difficulty in living here has sort of tipped past the point where it makes sense for us. So we decided to move someplace where the weather was warmer. It was snowing in Paris this week, and where we could get good spicy Mexican food, and where we could afford to buy a house, which we would never ever be able to do in Paris, and where we can communicate more easily. And we do miss the good baguettes and the good croissants and very inexpensive high-speed internet, among other things. But that's okay, because we're going to go back in November for a visit. By the way, in November, there's a cruise, a MacMania cruise down the Rhone River. It starts in Lyon, France, goes through Provence, ends in the town of Arles, which is one of the places Van Gogh did some of his famous paintings. So I'm going to be speaking on this cruise. Lex Friedman from Macworld is going to be speaking on it. Sal Segoyan from Apple, who does Automator and AppleScript, will be speaking on the cruise. So if you're not busy in November, you might want to come to France and visit me there and learn about Macs and iPads and stuff on a river cruise. So.
People here, Joe. Thanks a lot.
Okay.
Back to the previous one with the private networks. Is that detailed in your book? And if not, where can we find more information?
Yes, it is detailed in the book. So basically, virtual private networks were kind of invented for the corporate world. So let's say I'm a big company, and I have my secure internal network, and so everybody that's in the building connected physically to that network has a great deal of security. But now we need people to be able to work from home. We need for people to be able to work from a remote office, and from when they're traveling. Those people need to be able to get access to the internal secure corporate network as though they were there physically. So this is sort of the problem that virtual private networks were invented to solve. And what is usually the case is that the big corporation has a rack of equipment someplace, and that's their VPN server. And so you have some client software that runs on your Mac or PC or whatever, and it connects to this server back at the home office. And this is what enables you to have this secure connection between your remote device and their network, as though you were really there on the network. But most of us don't work for big corporations that have these sorts of things. And you can buy your own personal VPN server for home for a couple $100 or something. But what these companies that I'm talking about do is they basically say, hey, we have that hardware. Just, you don't have a corporation, no problem. Just pay us a little bit of money and you can connect to our private network. So it's inexpensive, and all you do is you basically sign up for a service, you pay them your money, you get your username and password, and they will say, okay, now here are all the settings you need. And you take your iPhone and your Mac and your various devices, and you enter those settings. And when you need the VPN, you turn it on. So yes, I do talk about these services in the book, and if you have any further questions after reading that, my email address is in there too. I think your microphone is still off if you're talking.
Okay.
Great lecture today. I watched you on Leo's show, and this was 100,000 times more informative, but I know that's because of the audience.
Of course.
I wanted to ask about iPad, iPhone security. I just recently went to a 6-digit number instead of 4, having read that was a lot more secure, but after looking at what you put up there, it doesn't sound so. And I also wanted to talk about this, have you talk a little bit about the sandbox and 1Password. That was a great shortcut you showed, that OP thing, but is there anything in the horizon that's going to get around that? Because that's very, very inconvenient using those great tools when you're using an iPad and an iPhone for, in my case, probably 90% of my internet activity.
Yeah, well, we have a kind of difficult problem. So the reason Apple invented, or they didn't invent it, but the reason Apple implemented this sort of sandboxing was to increase security. So they want to make sure that your iOS device is absolutely immune to any sort of malware. That even if something did somehow get onto your device, which would be very, very hard because of the Mac App Store or the iOS App Store, that it wouldn't be able to do any damage. That damage would be limited to one app. So I understand why they did it. It makes sense. But there's this consequence that in trying to increase security, they prevent you from using a password manager that would increase your security. Using a bookmarklet or the OP trick in 1Password is a way to get around it. It's better than nothing. It's not great. Using something like a password manager's built-in browser, same thing. It's awkward because even if the browser is great, every time you want to go to a website, you have to first enter your master password to unlock the browser. So that's a little bit of a hassle. Now, Safari on an iPad or iOS device does have the capability of memorizing passwords for you, but in my experience, it only works about a third of the time. Like there isn't a button where you can say, now save these passwords. You just sort of hope that it does, and then when you go back to the site later, you tap the autofill button and you hope that it works. But for me, most of the time it doesn't work. So most of the time it seems that however Apple has implemented this, the sites just don't support Apple's way of remembering and entering passwords. So one thing that Apple could do is they could improve their own autofill system so that it really worked. There would still be this problem that as long as your iPhone or iPad was unlocked, anybody could autofill any of your passwords because the key there is a keychain, although you can't see it on your iOS devices. It's really, really behind the scenes. It doesn't really have explicit controls to lock and unlock it. It's, whenever your iPhone is unlocked, it's unlocked. So Apple could improve that. Apple could decide that they are willing to trust certain companies and work together with them to say, okay, just for you, just in these situations, we're going to give you this sort of access to Safari. So far, Apple has not appeared to be willing to play with other people like that. So I don't know if they will. They could. I've got to believe that there are employees at Apple who are irritated by this stuff all the time. I hope their irritation level reaches the point where they actually decide to do something about it, but I don't know. I mean, who knows what Apple is planning? Now, there is a company that I mention in the book called Passban, and they are working on first let me say, there are a lot of companies that are trying really, really hard to solve this whole password problem, sort of from the other side, from the ground up. What Passban is working on, they have an Android app already, and they're working on an iOS app that uses a combination of factors to authenticate you. So it will use things like your physical location, and the sound of your voice, and the patterns of the way your body moves, and other sort of physical characteristics about you to uniquely identify you. So the idea is when you're using this device and this service, rather than having to make you type in a password, it'll just say, okay, well, we have the following 6 pieces of evidence. This guy is in this location, and his voice sounds like this, and he jiggles his phone in a certain way, and whatever the piece of information is. So yes, we think that's him. We'll just let him into the site. So I have yet to see this in action because I don't have an Android device, but that could be cool. Apple could build something like a fingerprint scanner into an iPhone, or an iris scanner or something. Who knows? I think there are lots of different ways. Facial recognition is part of this Passban thing, and Apple could use that. It's not foolproof. You can put a picture of yourself, a photograph of yourself in front of a camera and fool a camera. But I do think using a combination of attributes, well, we do have the guy's face and his voice and and his fingerprint. That's, probably good enough. It might be possible, but whether anything is really on the horizon or when or what it might be, I could only guess.
Yes.
Well, that was amazing, Joe, because that was my question. When are we going to go away from the keyboard to some more sophisticated identification methods? Thank you for answering ahead of time.
Sure. Well, I just want to mention, I had a fingerprint scanner for years. I got my first fingerprint scanner in, I don't know, like 2005 or something. Maybe even earlier than that. And for a long time, I would use my fingerprint scanner on my Mac instead of, typing my password. So this technology has been around for a long time. And that's just, one example. I liked being able to swipe my thumb instead of having to type a password. But, Apple always goes for lowest common denominator. They want things that are very, very, very consumer friendly. So I am skeptical that Apple would ever build a fingerprint scanner into a Mac. And so if the one company that I happen to get my fingerprint scanner from, due to whatever reasons, is no longer compatible with the latest version of Mac OS X, which was what happened, then, all of a sudden this capability goes away for me. Apple, the nut that Apple has to crack is from their side, from the point of view of the operating system and the hardware, coming up with something that they feel is easy enough and friendly enough for everyone to use, while yet being secure enough for those who need to use it for really, really serious things. If anybody can do it, I'm sure Apple can. But there have been, laptops available with built-in fingerprint scanners for years and years and years, and, haven't seen it on a MacBook Pro. So we'll see.
Well, thank you very, very much. It was a great meeting.
Glad to have been here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.